Okay, so, like, we hear about ADHD and autism all the time.
Right.
And it's easy to think they're kind of, I don't know, similar-ish.
Uh-huh.
Like someone's fidgety, can't focus, maybe a little socially awkward. Is that ADHD? Is that like being on the spectrum? Today, we're really going to unpack that because it turns out there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, a lot of overlap.
We're diving into this piece from Cheapaba, understanding the relationship between ADHD and autism, because it turns out that overlap is way more common than people think.
Definitely.
So to kick us off, can you just lay some groundwork? When we say ADHD, when we say autism, what are we actually talking about?
You know, you're right. It can be super confusing because, like you said, they can look similar on the surface.
Yeah.
But when we talk about ADHD, we're talking about issues with attention regulation, right? So, hyperactivity, impulsivity. Like, think that kid who can't sit still, blurts out answers, acts without thinking.
Okay.
Autism, though, it's a different ballgame. It's more about navigating the social world, difficulty with social cues, communication, and then those restrictive, repetitive behaviors.
Okay, so like really specific interests, routines, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Someone with autism might have a tough time understanding sarcasm or humor, get really fixated on a specific topic, and like need things a certain way, or else.
Gotcha. So two totally different things, but
Oh,
they could show up in similar ways sometimes.
yeah, and that's where it gets tricky.
Which I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, wait, that's me? Which one is it?
Exactly, because both can cause problems socially, but for different reasons, right?
Okay.
Someone with ADHD might blurt things out because they're impulsive. Someone with autism might say something that seems off because they missed a social cue.
So same struggle, but coming from
Totally different places.
different places. What about focus? Because we always talk about focus with both, right?
Right, but again, it's how. ADHD, they struggle to stay focused, pulled in a million directions.
Yeah.
Autism can be the opposite, super focused, but on their interest, to the exclusion of everything else, what we call hyperfocus.
Huh. So it's not just can you focus,
Yeah.
but how that focus works
Okay.
or doesn't, which is, I bet, an aha moment for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And it's not just those two things either, right?
Yeah.
What about like emotions?
Yeah. Huge for both. Both ADHD and autism can make it hard to regulate emotions. So you see outbursts, difficulty handling frustration,
Yeah.
even meltdowns.
And we usually think of sensory stuff like being overwhelmed by sounds or textures as an autism thing.
It's more common, yeah, and often more intense in autism for sure. But
But some people with ADHD experience that too.
you got it.
So we've got these two separate things, ADHD, autism, but they share so many like expressions, which makes me wonder, how often are we actually talking about both?
That's the million-dollar question, and the
Uh-huh.
answer is way more often than you'd think.
And this is where that cheap ABA article gets really interesting because they drop this stat. Up to 80% of autistic people also have ADHD symptoms, which, wow, I bet that's news to a lot of people. So
Yeah.
break that down. Why does that matter?
Well, it shows just how tricky things can get. You're trying to figure out what's going on, but the signs could point to either ADHD or autism.
Yeah, it's not always clear cut, is it?
Not at all, especially with kids, because their brains are still developing. It's like, are these just typical kid behaviors, or is something else going on? And if so, what is it?
So it's not always either or, right? It's more like
Like a spectrum, yeah.
a spectrum within the spectrum. Some people might be mostly ADHD, some mostly autistic, and some.
Right in the middle. And that's why it's so important to find an expert, someone who really knows their stuff about both, to do a proper assessment.
Because if you don't know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. You can't treat it effectively. Think about it. You give someone medication that's great for their ADHD, but they're also autistic, and it makes their sensory sensitivities worse.
Oh, well, so it could backfire.
Big time. Or you're in a classroom, and the teacher relies on social cues to manage behavior, but some kids are autistic, and they're not picking up on those cues at all.
Right. It's like knowing about this overlap could save everyone a lot of headache, a lot of trial and error.
Absolutely. And it really underscores this idea. Support has to be tailored to the individual. One size fits all just doesn't cut it.
It's like we talk about personalized medicine, but this is personalized everything.
Exactly. You have to look at the whole person, their strengths, their challenges, how everything interacts, and then create a plan that works for them.
Which means everyone needs to be in the loop, right?
100%. Parents, teachers, therapists, everyone who supports that person needs to be on the same page with a shared understanding of what's going on.
And this is why I love this kind of deep dive. It's empowering. Because the more we know,
The more we can advocate for ourselves, for our loved ones.
right, for anyone who might be navigating this, it's about being informed, asking the right questions.
And pushing for those comprehensive assessments, making sure people's needs are truly understood and met.
So it's not about slapping on a label, but really meeting people where they are.
Exactly. Celebrating the differences. Because both ADHD and autism, they come with amazing strengths too.
It's like we get so focused on the problems that we forget, these are amazing brains too.
Totally. ADHD. Think outside the box, bursting with ideas, that go-getter energy.
Yeah.
And autism. That incredible eye for detail, that sense of right and wrong, that unique way of seeing the world. Seriously. It's powerful stuff.
It really makes you think differently about, like, neurodiversity as a whole. You know, it's not about fixing anything, but appreciating these are just different ways of being that bring so much to the table.
Exactly. And when we start to see those differences, not as deficits, but as strengths, that's where the magic happens, both for the individual and for everyone around them.
Love that.
Yeah.
So if anything in this deep dive resonated, if you're like, that sounds familiar, it's not about diagnosing yourself or anyone else.
Right.
It's about having new information, a new way to understand things. Maybe it helps you support someone you love better. Maybe it's a starting point to talk to your doctor. Maybe you just understand your own brain a little better now. Whatever it is, knowledge is power.
Couldn't agree more.
Because when we move past those simple labels and really get into the nitty-gritty, the complexity of being human, that's how we build a world where everyone feels seen, heard, valued for exactly who they are. And that's something worth striving for, don't you think?
Absolutely.
So keep those questions coming, keep digging deeper, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.